Three times in modern history, countries did something that should have destroyed their currencies forever. Countries printed trillions in amounts that violated all known economic rules. And in all three cases, exactly the same thing happened. Their currencies not only survived, they became stronger. This defies everything you've learned about basic economics. Massive money printing should cause hyperinflation. It should destroy international confidence. It should lead to currency collapse. But that's not what happened. In none of the three cases. The first case happened between 1914 and 1945. A country financed two world wars by printing impossible amounts of money. Economists at the time predicted total collapse. Instead, its currency maintained global reserve status for additional decades. The second case lasted 30 consecutive years. From 1990 to 2020, a country continuously printed money on a scale that should have caused uncontrolled inflation. International analysts predicted imminent disaster year after year. Instead, the country faced deflation, and its currency remained one of the most stable in the world. The third case is happening now. Since 2008, and especially since 2020, a country has printed more than $8 trillion. Critics have warned of imminent collapse for over a decade. Instead, its currency is at its strongest point in 20 years against a basket of global currencies. Three different countries. Three distinct historical periods. Three completely diverse economic contexts. But the same impossible result. Massive money printing led to the strengthening, not the weakening of their currencies. There is a pattern here. A pattern that most economists don't recognize because it contradicts fundamental monetary theory. A pattern that explains why some countries can break the rules while others cannot print even a little without devastating consequences. And here's what makes this urgent. The United States is repeating exactly the same pattern now. The Federal Reserve has printed more money in the last 4 years than in all previous American history combined. And instead of collapse, the dollar is strengthening globally. The question is not whether this is sustainable. The question is, why does it work? And why can only some countries do this? The answer will completely change how you understand global monetary power. In 1990, Japan began a monetary experiment that should have ended in total disaster. For 30 consecutive years, the Bank of Japan printed money on a scale that violated all known economic rules. International analysts predicted imminent collapse decade after decade. Instead, Japan proved that the British pattern was no historical accident. The crash of the Japanese real estate bubble in 1990 created persistent deflation that threatened to destroy the economy. The Bank of Japan's response was revolutionary. Continuous money printing on a scale never before attempted in peacetime. Between 1990 and 2020, Japan expanded its monetary base by over 500%. Western economists were horrified. Paul Krugman warned of a permanent liquidity trap. Milton Friedman predicted that Japanese money printing would cause uncontrolled inflation eventually. Wally, street analysts dubbed Japanese policy monetary madness, but the numbers tell a different story. During 30 years of insane printing, Japan maintained inflation close to zero. The yen remained one of the most stable currencies in the world. International reserves in yen continued to grow. Tokyo maintained its position as an important global financial center. Most impressively, while printing trillions, Japan became the world's largest international creditor. Global investors bought Japanese bonds precisely because they trusted the stability of the yen, despite massive money printing. It was a paradox that defied fundamental economic logic. The secret lay in the yen's unique position as a regional and global reserve currency. Asian central banks held significant reserves in yen. Regional trade was denominated in yen. Global investors used the yen as a safe haven currency during crises. This external demand absorbed domestic printing. More importantly, Japan discovered it could use money printing to buy global assets without domestic inflationary consequences. Japanese banks financed by printed money bought American bonds, European real estate, Asian companies. It was an export of liquidity on an unprecedented scale. The Bank of Japan expanded this strategy after 2008. Japanese quantitative easing not only bought domestic bonds, but financed Japanese investments globally. Sony, Toyota, SoftBank all benefited from cheap capital created through money printing to expand internationally. Critics continued to predict collapse. In 2010, 2015, 2020, always next year the yen would collapse. It never happened. Instead, during global crises like 2008 and 2020, investors flocked to the yen as a safe asset. The currency that should have collapsed became a refuge during turmoil. The Japanese experiment proved that the British pattern was not a historical anomaly. Countries with reserve currencies can print trillions without traditional consequences, as long as they maintain global demand for their currencies. It was a lesson the United States was about to apply on an even larger scale. In 2008, the United States began the most audacious money printing experiment in human history. Over the next 15 years, the Federal Reserve created more than $8 trillion out of thin air. According to all established economic theory, this should have destroyed the dollar and caused global hyperinflation. Instead, exactly the opposite happened. The 2008 financial crisis forced the Fed to choose between the collapse of the banking system or unprecedented money printing. Ben Bernanke chose to print. The first round of quantitative easing created $1.2 trillion. Critics predicted uncontrolled inflation and dollar collapse. It didn't happen. QE2 in 2010 added another $600 billion. QE3 in 2012 created $85 billion monthly indefinitely. With each round, economists warned of inevitable inflationary consequences. With each round, the dollar strengthened instead of weakening. It was an exact repetition of the British and Japanese patterns. But 2020 took American money printing into completely unexplored territory. In response to the pandemic, the Fed created more than $4 trillion in less than 18 months. It was more money than all previous American printing combined. Economists predicted 20% inflation, dollar collapse, the end of the international monetary system. The numbers reveal what actually happened. The dollar index, DXY, which measures the dollar's strength against a basket of major currencies, reached 20-year highs in 2022. Global reserves in dollars increased to over 60% of the world total. Demand for American bonds reached historical records. Even as American inflation temporarily rose to 9% in 2022, the dollar continued to strengthen globally. Why? Because American inflation of 9% was still lower than inflation in Europe, 10%, the United Kingdom, 11%, and much lower than in emerging countries. Relatively, the dollar remained the most stable option, more revealing. While the Fed printed trillions, global central banks aggressively bought dollars. China increased dollar reserves. Europe maintained dollars as its primary reserve. Emerging countries flocked to dollars during every crisis. American money printing created a relative scarcity of dollars globally. The pattern became clear: domestic printing, global demand, currency strengthening. The Fed could create trillions because the world needed trillions in dollars to function. Global trade, bank reserves, commodity prices, international debts, everything denominated in dollars. The genius lay in the export of liquidity. Dollars created by the Fed did not stay in the American economy. They flowed to European banks, Asian companies, emerging governments. It was a global subsidy financed by American money printing, and the world paid for this privilege by holding dollar reserves. Critics continue to predict an imminent dollar collapse. But the data shows continuous strengthening. As long as the world needs dollars more than America needs to control domestic inflation, the pattern will continue. It is monetary physics, not traditional economic theory. Now you can see the same pattern repeating with mathematical precision across three separate historical cases: United Kingdom, Japan, United States. All discovered that global reserve currencies operate under completely different monetary physics than purely domestic currencies. And this discovery is shaping the future of the global economy right now. The pattern is elegant in its simplicity. When you control a currency that the world needs to function, you can print impossible amounts without traditional consequences. Global demand absorbs domestic printing. Relative scarcity replaces absolute abundance. Monetary strength comes from international necessity, not domestic fiscal discipline. But here's what makes this urgent. The United States is not just repeating this pattern, it is expanding it into unexplored territory. The Fed did not stop printing after 2020. It continues to expand its balance sheet through technical operations that create liquidity without public announcements. It is silent money printing on a scale that makes previous QE seem modest. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to recognize them. American bond markets absorb record emissions without a significant increase in yields. Global demand for dollars continues to outstrip supply. despite trillions created. Countries that tried to de-dollarize their economies are quietly returning to dollars. More importantly, the global infrastructure is becoming even more dependent on dollars, not less. Cryptocurrencies are priced in dollars. Artificial intelligence requires chips paid for in dollars. Renewable energy depends on materials bought with dollars. Every technological innovation deepens global dependence on the American monetary system. China, often cited as a challenger to the dollar, actually demonstrates the strength of the American pattern. Despite rhetoric about de-dollarization, Chinese reserves remain predominantly in dollars. Chinese trade continues to be settled primarily in dollars. Chinese companies issue debt in dollars to access global markets. For investors, understanding this pattern offers a crucial strategic advantage. Instead of betting against the dollar based on money printing, recognize that printing can signal strength, not weakness. Instead of expecting uncontrolled inflation, understand that global demand can absorb domestic monetary creation. The pattern also reveals why attempts to create alternatives to the dollar consistently fail. Euro, yuan, cryptocurrencies all face the same fundamental problem: lack of structural global demand. You cannot simply create a reserve currency. You need to create global necessity for your currency. We are witnessing an evolution, not a revolution, of the global monetary system. The United States is using the same pattern that the United Kingdom and Japan used, but on a scale amplified by digitalization and globalization. It is money printing for the internet age. The question is not whether this pattern is sustainable. History shows it can last for decades. The question is, how long will the world continue to need dollars more than America needs monetary discipline? As long as the answer is indefinitely, the pattern will continue. And the United States will continue to print trillions while its currency strengthens globally.